Good evening and welcome everybody to this online presentation by Max Anderson of Butterfly Conservation. I'm Lindsay Mann from Devon Wildlife Trust and I work in a project called Saving Devon's Treescapes. So it's that project which is bringing you this event this evening as part of a series of citizen science events that we run. I'm just going to do a brief introduction to the project to set this evening's event in context. Bear with me while I share the screen. So we're obviously here tonight to talk about monitoring our most elusive butterfly using UV light. And I am not going to say any more about that because that is very much Max's subject. And some of you in the audience will definitely know how we've come to be here this evening and talking about that. But I might touch on that just slightly in a minute. But a little bit of background to Saving Devon's Treescapes. We are a partnership project which is led by Devon Wildlife Trust, but on behalf of the Devon Ash Dieback Resilience Forum. We are a partnership project and there are a huge range of partners. Most of the larger ones certainly are pictured on the screen there. And we're supported and funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, One Tree Planted and other sponsors and funders as well. It's a 5-year project and we're now in year 3 of delivery. So we've got another 2 full years to go. We run until the end of March 2026. And the aim is to support local communities across Devon to plant and nurture over 250,000 trees during the course of the project. Our focus is on trees outside of woodland, so we're definitely not a woodland creation project. There's lots of different ways you can get your hands on free trees out there, and ours is not for developing new woodland. And the reason that we exist is because of ash dieback disease. So our aim is to make the treescapes of our wonderful county more resilient for the future in the face of whatever challenges may come. And there's likely, of course, to be more tree diseases, pest-borne diseases, but also climate change might present some challenges for our tree species. So the more resilient we can make those treescapes by planting as big a range of broadleaf native species as we can, then hopefully the more will survive those future tree diseases and the treescapes will still be there to support our wildlife, which is so important. So alongside the tree planting elements of our project, we have a focus on citizen science and we're using you good people to help us monitor some key species that have a particular relationship with our trees and in some cases with ash trees in particular. And I'll talk a little bit about those species that we've chosen for this project in a moment. But just to say as well, although we are a Devon-wide project, there are some core focus areas within the county that we're particularly keen to be collecting data about. And those are the areas shown in blue on that map. So in South Devon, Torbay, Exeter and Cranbrook area, the Coley Valleys and Niroche, which actually goes just across the border into Somerset. So we are allowed to do a little bit of work in Somerset too, which is lovely. So we're talking about butterflies today, and brown hairstreak butterfly is one of the species that we are monitoring under our citizen science programme. That's my boss in the centre of the screen there, Rosie, when she found her very first brown hairstreak butterfly egg. And as you can see, she was pretty excited about it. I'm guessing that most of the audience know what these look like, but just in case you don't, the egg is at the top there, very, very tiny. There's the first instar hatching on the right-hand side, a later stage of the caterpillar at the bottom, and of course the adult version of the brown hairstreak on the left-hand side. As well as the brown hairstreaks, we're monitoring various other species across the year. Don't worry too much about the detail on this slide, but basically throughout the whole year, we're monitoring trees and recording trees with our focuses on notable trees. We're monitoring and identifying and recording lichens. And then the brown hairstreak butterfly surveys, of course, take place during the winter when we're looking for the eggs on the blackthorn. Harvest mouse surveys also take place throughout the winter months. And just at the moment, I'm gearing up to host the Devon Bat Survey, which will run throughout May through to the end of September and into October slightly as well. And we do also support the RSPB's cell bunting survey programme too. So there's a range of different species, a range of different survey methodologies to keep people interested and engaged. You pick one, pick many. It certainly keeps my life varied and interesting and a very, very enjoyable job that I have. I'm very lucky. So if you're interested in any of those, I will let you have my contact details and I'll follow up with an email at the end of today's session. So do get in touch and I can let you know how to join in with any of those other monitoring schemes if you're interested. That's my slide for the very end, but I will post those links in later. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to Max, please.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Hello, everyone. For those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Max Anderson, and I currently work for Butterfly Conservation as a landscape officer in the Southwest. So I cover the whole of Devon and Somerset. And today I'm going to be talking about the use of UV light torch surveys as a way of monitoring some of our most elusive butterflies. So my biggest interest when it comes to butterflies is on this family of butterflies, the lycaenids, the blues, the coppers, and the hairstreaks. And today I'm mostly going to focus on the hairstreaks, what we've got at the bottom right here, these species. These are the key priority species when it comes to surveying using UV light, given how effective that can be. And I'll talk about that in a little while. So we've got 17 species of lycaenid in the UK. And of course, when we start talking about surveying, we talk about conservation of butterflies. It's all about the adult butterflies. They're the front and center of all of the posters and calendars that we have, and the focus for most budding and experienced lepidopterists. But really, when you think about it, adults are really awkward things. They move around so much, and we're often double counting them during surveys. We can often misidentify them. So they're a real pain to deal with, adult butterflies. And when we really get an idea of how long or how much of the year an individual spends at the adult stage, it's a lot less than it is at other life stages. So, for example, here, what I've done is I've taken all of the lycaenid butterflies in the UK, and I've taken a rough average of how many weeks of the year we're likely to see an individual at any particular stage. On the left-hand side, we can see that as an adult, we're only on average really likely to see them for around about 13 weeks of the year. Whereas at the larval stage, we're likely to see them for much longer in the year, which means that, there should be more of an emphasis on conserving this stage of the butterfly rather than at the adult stage. You might be able to argue that point anyway. So why is it that we are obsessed with the adult stage? I'll grant you that they are beautiful, but I'll also argue that the other life stages really pack a punch when it comes to the awe and the beauty that rivals and often outdoes those of the adults, though of course that's subjective. And even when we talk about managing our nature reserves and landscapes for butterflies, we often fall into the trap of focusing on adult butterflies when in fact they are far less vulnerable than the other stages. Yes, the adults are very important, of course, but they can always fly off and find somewhere else to occupy if they're able to do so. And the same fortune is not always granted to caterpillars. And of course, the egg and the pupa have to deal with where they've developed as a pupa or where they've been laid, so they're helpless. So we really need to focus on these other life stages when it comes to managing our nature reserves and landscapes, because this is where they're most vulnerable. Caterpillars, they can't fly, they have to stay where they are. They can move, but not at great speed. And this slide really demonstrates the beauty of some of the other life stages. We've got small copper in here, the bottom left. We've got a small copper pupa. We've got a small copper egg. We've got white letter hairstreak caterpillars. We've got a black hairstreak pupa. Remarkable diversity and mimicry and beauty to be seen. And I'd really like to encourage more people to go out there and look for these early life stages, because this is where the unknowns really lie. There's so much detail and intricacy around the behavior of these early life stages, of which they're incredibly vulnerable. And we can learn a lot and have a real positive impact on the conservation of some of our more threatened species. So the story around the use of ultraviolet light for me, and the use of that for surveying some of our more elusive butterflies, starts with the black hairstreak. And obviously in Devon, it's not a species that we have, but I spent some time over in Sussex during my PhD, and it's a species that I was fortunate enough to spend a bit of time getting to know. And they're a very, very elusive butterfly as an adult. They spend most of their time at the tops of blackthorn clumps and trees, and they're very, very picky about when they'll choose to be active. The caterpillars will feed on blackthorn, just like brown hairstreaks, and their habitat is they do have some overlaps with brown hairstreak, but it is slightly different. They tend to be these sort of slightly humid and damp um, corridors, sort of hedgerows and woodland edges with blackthorn in abundance. And this was about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. I was very fortunate enough to find an adult perching low down on some bracken. Not a sight that's very, very common for this species. So the female then dips off and decides to lay an egg on the blackthorn. Um, and they'll quite often lay it on quite mature stuff rather than with the brown hairstreak where we'd expect them to lay it on often quite young growth of blackthorn. There's quite a lot of variability in where the female black hairstreak chooses to lay the egg. They're very, very difficult to find. They're well camouflaged against the blackthorn stems. It makes it difficult to spot them. And after the eggs hatch and the caterpillars emerge, they will wander off. They'll find a bud, they will chew a hole in the bud, and then they will dip in and start to feed on the bud for some time. And after that point, for me, it became a bit of a mystery as to what was going on. As the leaves start to unfold, it becomes very difficult to keep track of where these caterpillars are going. And you turn your back for a few minutes and they've moved to another leaf, and it takes a long time to keep a track of them. And fortunate enough, not too long after finding the signs of the caterpillars burrowing into the buds, I spent some time going out at night. Um, I was doing some field work for my PhD at the time, which required me to go out at night to monitor bats. And I decided to take a UV torch along with me. And believe it or not, within this image, which was about 15, 20 meters away from where I was stood, I could spot a black hairstreak caterpillar in amongst the dense blackthorn. I'm not going to ask anybody to point it out, but if we switch on the UV torch and turn off the white light torch, we can see where the caterpillar is amongst the blackthorn. And it really is that obvious in person. I'm sure a few people have tried this that are in attendance today. And it is remarkable, truly remarkable to see how effective this is in seeing the caterpillars. So for reference, I went out during the winter of 2021, and I spent about 22 hours looking for eggs of black hairstreak and only found 3 or 4 eggs in that time, which is quite frustrating versus the successes I've had in looking for brown hairstreaks in the same time. Finding over 200 eggs in that time wouldn't be uncommon, particularly in parts of Sussex. So it's a very different ball game to be able to go out and use something this easy to spot the caterpillars, just like that. And what is it that we're seeing here? Well, the term is ultraviolet induced visible fluorescence. And essentially what this means is the caterpillar is absorbing UV light from the torch, and it's re-emitting it as something in the visible spectrum to us within our own visible spectrum. And while we can only really take advantage of this at night, it's during the day that this is most likely to be coming into play for these caterpillars. It's almost certainly a mechanism for reducing predation by birds, which can all see, or many of which can see in the UV spectrum. It's interesting that scorpions are another species group that can also fluoresce under ultraviolet light. And we've known about this for a very, very long time, but we still don't completely understand why scorpions are able to fluoresce. Perhaps it serves as protection, but it's not something we're fully aware of. And there's still questions around that need to be answered. So ultimately, this method of using the ultraviolet light torches to find the caterpillars allows us to do a lot of different things. These caterpillars are very elusive. They're very well camouflaged up against the blackthorn leaves, and often they're very, very difficult places to reach. Blackthorn's a very spiky plant. It's awkward to work with. And so it really allows us to find these caterpillars with great ease, and then to study them and learn more about their ecology and their behavior. Um, we can follow them for a lot longer and track them through to pupation, which is really, really valuable. We can learn more about where on the plant they like to feed. We could potentially backtrack from where the caterpillars are. We go out and find a few caterpillars. We can mark those trees and then return during the day and potentially search those trees for the egg cases, which can tell us a lot about where the females prefer to lay their eggs. So there's a lot that this new technique could teach us about the ecology of these rare species. We can also learn about, obviously, the perfect conditions, the ideal and the preferred conditions for females for egg laying, and for which locations the adults are choosing to lay their eggs on, and where the caterpillars are feeding on these plants. So there's a lot more we can learn about their ecology and their habitats and their habitat preferences. I mentioned that we can track them through to pupation. These are a few different pupa of the black hairstreak that were found, and you might think these are really easy to find, and they're easier to find than the eggs, and certainly than the caterpillars, but they're still quite difficult. They're very, very small. They're a lot smaller than you would think, and they're remarkably well camouflaged. Obviously, they're camouflaged to look like bird droppings, and it does take a bit of time to get your eye in to spot these. So a colleague and I had done some research to try and apply this new method, this ultraviolet torch survey, in order to determine the effectiveness of this versus other approaches. And essentially, in summary, we found that it was remarkably effective versus a range of other approaches, whether that be egg searches and even adult counts. So it really provides an opportunity for us to really get into the presence and the distribution of some of these very elusive species. So Gareth Tilley is now doing his PhD on this subject. I'm sure he's going to have a lot more to uncover with some exciting findings to come, I'm sure. So moving on to another species that this works remarkably well for is the brown hairstreak, something that more of you should be more familiar with, something very relevant to the Saving Devon's Treescapes project, of course. Similar to the black hairstreak, the brown hairstreak adults are remarkably elusive. They are incredibly picky about when they choose to be active during the day. They're often described as late risers. You know, that I think I would recommend people going out to find them between 10 and 11 o'clock in the morning on good summer's days in late August. But there's a lot that we don't really understand about the behavior of the adults. They're remarkably difficult to spot, and they're very quick flyers. So not a common sight to find an adult, particularly in Devon, I would say. The eggs, on the other hand, are very conspicuous, I would say. This is the focus and the target for surveys across the country, and even in Europe as well. A lot of people do egg searches and timed counts in order to understand not only the presence and the absence of the species, but also looking at changes in the density of the populations. It's a good way of measuring population changes over time. And we monitor them because they're conspicuous, and because it's an accessible and an easy thing to do. It's a good time of year to wrangle volunteers to go out and do some surveys, particularly during the winter when things get a little bit quieter. Interestingly, of course, the caterpillars, they spend a lot of their time on the undersides of the leaves, but the survey, the ultraviolet light survey, still works remarkably well for them, arguably better for the brown hairstreak than for the black hairstreak. I'll talk a little bit more about the torches a little bit later on, which types of torches are most effective. And Gareth is about to publish some work looking at the effectiveness of different wavelengths of ultraviolet light torches for surveying different species, which I think there's a preprint available online for that at the moment, which is very useful. So yeah, another species that this works remarkably well for, even at second instar, which is not something that applies to many of the species that also fluoresce under UV. And here's another image that would be quite common if you're walking at night and you shine a light on some some of the brown hairstreak's food plant. It's not super easy to pick out where the caterpillars are in this, but there are in fact two within this image towards the top and the bottom. So if I just span between the two, you might be able to spot them in the first image as well. So it is that easy. It is remarkable how effective this technique is. And I would recommend if people would like to try it, to give it a shot. We're approaching that sort of time of year. That would be very useful to give this a shot. So this is just a video that illustrates the point. It might not be super clear, but let's see how it goes. So on this little patch of blackthorn here, there were 3 caterpillars. And you'll notice that I'm not shining the torch directly at the caterpillars. They do fluoresce just with the spill off of the torch, which is really interesting. And sometimes shining the torch directly at them doesn't help the visibility of it. So another thing that this really helps with, not only in spotting the caterpillars, but also being able to monitor new behaviors and learning more about their ecology and their association with other species. And here we have a brown hairstreak caterpillar that's being tended to, or appears to be being tended to, by some ants. And we know that a number of other lycaenid butterflies at the larval stage have associations with ants. The silver-sooted blue and the large blue are 2 good examples where there are ants that are integral to the life cycle of these species. And so this is really useful, having more of an understanding of which types of ants and how they interact with this butterfly could start to determine how we manage habitats, because we're not only managing for the butterfly, we need to manage for those ants potentially. So it's a potentially useful tool for trying to uncover more of the ecology of not just this species, but the association that it may have with others as well. We've also got a purple hairstreak, which is a very, very widespread and common species in the UK. Potentially our most widespread hairstreak. I would probably put money on that it is the most widespread in the UK. Again, sorry, as adults, incredibly elusive. You'd probably want to spend a nice summer's evening beneath an oak tree, take a picnic blanket and a nice drink of your choice, and just lie down and look up, and you'd probably have a good chance at spotting some purple hairstreaks in action. Again, the eggs are, to start with, when they're laid, they're quite conspicuous. But as the time goes on, they become more well camouflaged and harder to spot. And we can see that from the first image. They often pick up bits of debris and sometimes bits of lichen or algae develop on the egg. That means that it's quite difficult to spot, and they're often in amongst the buds of the oak, which makes it quite hard to spot them sometimes. So not the most reliable technique for surveying for this species. Also, we're also relying on the fact that we have accessible branches. Oak trees are not all very forgiving in where their branches are. We might often not have any branches to grab and check for eggs. So not particularly reliable technique for surveying it by looking for the eggs alone. The caterpillars are really, really pretty caterpillars, but they spend a lot of the time during the day in amongst the base of the leaves, with some of the other leaf litter as well, towards the base of the leaf. You can see here the caterpillar sort of nudged in here with some of the bracts of the new leaves that are coming through. So very well camouflaged in amongst that. And during the day, this is where they'll spend most of their time, but during the night, they become more active. And we can see here's one just at the end of one of these oak leaves. Again, it's one of the species that fluoresces remarkably well, really pretty turquoise-like colors with this particular torch that I'm using. And again, we can start to learn more about the behavior of this species and where it spends its time feeding, what sort of branches the butterfly prefers to lay its eggs on, for the caterpillars to feed on. So again, a really remarkable opportunity to learn more about this species at larval stage. So again, we see that this fluoresces under ultraviolet light, provides that opportunity to go out and find them. Oak trees are, I would say, pretty much everywhere. So a real opportunity to fill in some gaps in the UK as to where records haven't been received yet. I'm one of those people that thinks that there are probably purple hairstreaks on every large oak in the country. And it would be really cool to try and prove if that's right or not. But yeah, get out there and see if you can find any for yourselves. One of the last species I want to talk about is the white-legged hairstreak. It's one of my favorite species. The adults are very elusive. They very rarely come down from the tops of elm trees or other master trees that they'll occupy. If they do, it's to either lay eggs or to nectar from things like creeping thistle, which is a particular favorite so far as I'm concerned. The eggs are very conspicuous. They look like flying saucer sweets. They're really cool eggs. Nothing quite like them um, in the UK, at least. I'm sure there are some others across the world that look quite similar to this, but yeah, really remarkable. And they often lay their eggs on the scars between successive years worth of growth on elm trees, and occasionally on the base of buds on elms. And the caterpillars are fantastic little things. They hatch in late winter, very early spring, and then they dip into the flowers or the buds on the elm to feed, and they just disappear. And they're really hard to keep track of. I was fortunate to have some nearby when I was living in Sussex at a local park, and this is basically what I found. I think there was three within about a meter, and they were peppered all over the place on this particular elm. Um, and so a really, really interesting insight for me is the first time I'd really gotten very close to this species as a caterpillar. So very interesting stuff to learn more about this species. Yeah, again, very fortunate that we had elms in abundance in Sussex, and that's not necessarily the case across most of the UK. But if you do know of any elms, then get out and see if you can find any white-legged hairstreaks occupying those elms. The caterpillars are really difficult to find, even at earlier instars. These are masters of camouflage, particularly at the early instars, second into third. There's one here that's mimicking the colours of the bud. And I don't know how they managed to do this. Obviously, evolution in action. But yeah, remarkable species. And even as they get older into their third and fourth instars, they have these furrows on the caterpillar that resemble the edges of the elm leaves, and they happen to position themselves in the perfect locations to make them very well camouflaged. So masters of camouflage. So really interestingly, this new technique, the ultraviolet torch surveys, has allowed me to find a new colony of white-legged hairstreak in my local town in Exmouth in East Devon. And this is the first record of a white-legged hairstreak that we've ever had in Exmouth. And I was also fortunate enough to find a pre-pupa on the base of, on the underside of some ivy that was growing at the base of this tree. So in the right-hand image, you can see where the pupa is starting to form just here. And it was actually on one of the leaves, of course, at the end of this long branch. So the caterpillar had wandered all the way down and decided to pupate on the underside of this ivy leaf. And there's still a lot we don't really know about the decisions that these caterpillars take in where they will where they would like to pupate. So this technique can also allow us to learn more about the decisions that they'll make in terms of where they pupate, and that can impact the decisions that we make in the management of these trees. And we might choose not to clear the base of the tree of ivy because it provides a really useful location for pupation for these species. I'm going to move on to a different Lycaenid. So it's not one of our hairstreaks. In fact, it's the holly blue. It's probably one of our, again, very, very widespread species in the UK. And fortunately as well, just down the road from me, we've got a lane that is covered in ivy, both sides. So we've got a very sun-exposed side and a shaded side. And there was one evening that I went out with my UV torch to count the number of holly blue caterpillars along this hedge, and I think it was close to 100 within 2 evenings that I managed to count. So remarkable numbers and a really effective technique for tracking some of these species. Even finding on the ivy, the vast majority of the caterpillars were uniformly green, like this one on the right, but there were only one or two that had these pink stripes on the dorsal surface, much like small copper occasionally. presents like. So very interesting to see this and to get an idea of what proportion of the population has this and what's driving that. So a really accessible way using the UV torch to keep track of these and to be able to get some good numbers and be able to ask these sorts of questions. So here's an image of the caterpillar at the base of one of the ivy buds, and under ultraviolet light, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. It's very easy to spot them, and yeah, it's a very accessible food plant for surveying this species with a UV torch. Of course, the holly blue has a wide range of larval food plants, but ivy is a particularly effective one for surveying. I suspect that things like holly might be more difficult because they might spend a little bit more time nestled in amongst the base of the berries and the buds, and they're not as accessible and easy to spot as these ivy buds are. Another species that I've got in the back garden, only in the last year have I found it in the back garden, is small copper on common sorrel. And the caterpillars give away their presence by these paths that they create, and they're basically windows. They take the underside of the leaf, they start to chew on the leaf, and they leave a very thin layer of cells that makes for a window on the other side. So you can see on the right hand side we've got these small windows that are a telltale sign of small copper feeding activity. So that's a way of looking at the leaves and being able to determine whether we've got a small copper feeding activity. But conveniently as well, the caterpillars also fluoresce under ultraviolet light. Now, there's a lot of questions as to whether this would be an effective survey technique for something like the small copper. And I would suggest that it probably isn't, primarily because it spends most of its time on the undersides of the leaves. And so you would have to constantly be turning over leaves whilst holding a torch in order to find these caterpillars. So not necessarily the best approach to surveying this species. I'd like to just warn everybody about applying this technique themselves. While we're all for encouraging people to do this, I need to mention that it's a very dangerous thing to expose yourself to ultraviolet light for excessive periods of time. And we would strongly recommend people to use suitable protective eyewear if you'd like to give this a go. And you can get it very, very cheap, as long as you're getting UV protective goggles or glasses. You should be protected for a good amount of time. I'd also recommend limiting the amount of time that you use the UV torch to, an hour or two, and give yourself a bit of a break, because it can be pretty tough on the eyes. The next thing to mention is that it's really, really important that you submit your records. Some of our hairstreaks and many other lycaenids as well are some of our most poorly recorded species in the UK. And it's really important that if you have any records, that you submit them either to your local record centre or to your local branch of butterfly conservation, or to iRecord. There's plenty of different places you can submit these records to. Just pick one, whichever you'd like the most, or whichever is most convenient, and just go for it, because this sort of data really drives the decisions that we have to make in how we manage our nature reserves and how we manage our landscapes. So yeah, really important for any records to be submitted if you have them. This subject of ultraviolet torch surveys is quite a new subject, though there has been some previous work that's been done on this, namely this paper here that looked at another species of lycaenid, frosted elfin in North America, and they showed that the technique was effective for surveying this species. Another very elusive adult butterfly, and the caterpillars feeding away on their food plants can be found relatively easy at night using ultraviolet torch surveys. But there's also a variety of other species that fluoresce under ultraviolet light, and it's here where really there's a lot of discoveries to be made. It'd be really useful to have a catalogue of which species do fluoresce at which stages. And this is not just restricted to our butterflies. This extends into moths, many of which are far more threatened than some of our butterflies are, and also beyond moths and butterflies into a wide range of other invertebrates as well. So please do share your findings. If you find that there are some moths or caterpillars that do fluoresce and you're able to identify what they are, then we're really interested to know what they are. because there are some very rare species that this technique could be really important in terms of understanding the distribution and the trends in their population numbers. So the next time that you're walking around your local park, or you happen to be at the back of a Sainsbury's and you find a load of blackthorn and you think, oh, it'd be really cool to see if there are any caterpillars there. I wonder if that's occupied by butterflies. Then you can use this technique. This is what I did. This is how I found local populations in new locations. And it's a remarkably effective tool for doing that. In summary, really, though, there's a lot that this technique can be used for. Of course, it can tell us whether something is present, whether we've got, for example, brown hairstreaks or black hairstreaks or white letter hairstreaks present in a particular location. We can also look at the distribution of these species by doing surveys across a wide range of habitats. We can identify which locations the butterfly is, or whichever species it is that you're surveying has been found. We can also backtrack from where the caterpillars are to find the locations that the females have decided to lay their eggs. In particular, for for black hairstreak, that would be particularly useful. We can also track them forwards to their pupation sites. And again, these have direct implications for management. We can observe the behavior of the larvae. We can watch how they feed. We can look at their emergence times, and that can tell us when the adult butterflies are ready to come onto the wing. We can observe their associations with ants, which again might have connotations for the management of these habitats. And we can also potentially look at parasitism and predation of these caterpillars by looking at parasitic wasps or flies and exploring those relationships. I'd sort of mentioned this a little bit earlier on about which species this is particularly useful for. And I would suggest that it's probably the most useful technique for, with specific regard to butterflies, for those butterflies that have very elusive adults, for those which we struggle to have consistent records or an easy and accessible way of recording that butterfly as an adult. It'd be really useful for those species that have very cryptic or very well camouflaged eggs. So the brown hairstreak is very well suited to egg searchers, but the black hairstreak is poorly suited to that. So this approach would be particularly useful for something like a black hairstreak, but it can also be very useful for brown hairstreak as well, particularly where the habitats are not very accessible. Maybe the blackthorn is out of reach, and it'd be very useful to learn more about that. It's also a lot more useful for species that occupy larval host plants that are trees or shrubs, or at the very least, the tall growing plants. I used the example of the small copper earlier on, that if you were to survey for that using a UV torch, you would have to meticulously turn over leaves in order to find the caterpillar, which is very laborious, and you may as well just do it during the day. Whereas for something like the white letter hairstreak, all you need to do is find an elm tree, stand beneath it, and shine your torch, and you give yourself a relatively easy chance, if the tree is occupied, at finding a caterpillar. So they're the sort of criteria that I've identified as priorities for surveying, particularly for our more elusive adult species of butterfly. So really highlighted that it's not just the hairstreaks, it's also, we've got holly blue and small copper, but there are almost certainly a wide range of other species that will also fluoresce outside of the family of the blues, coppers, and hairstreaks as well. And as I mentioned earlier on, it'd be really useful to try and uncover more information about which species do fluoresce and whether some of our more elusive and rarer species outside of the Lycaenidae, outside of the blues, coppers, and hairstreaks do fluoresce, because that could be a really valuable conservation tool and monitoring method for learning more about the distribution, the occupancy, and population trends of some of our more rare and elusive species. Thank you so much for listening. I've put my email address down here, so if anybody wants to ask some questions via email, I'm more than happy to take questions another time. But as Lindsay said, if you fancy asking a question today, if you want to pop it in the chat, that's probably the most useful way of getting that forward, and I can do my best to answer some questions.
Was amazing, Max. Thank you very much for that. just incredible photos as well, and such a lot of information there in a short space of time. Thank you so much. We have got some questions. So there were some things that were fluorescing in your photos, Max, that weren't caterpillars. Do you know what they were?
Yeah, there's a wide range of other things there. So some of the things that are fluorescing include aphids. We've got hoverflies that also fluoresce, crane flies. It really is remarkable to see what does fluoresce. Around the purple hairstreak caterpillar in particular, I was finding a lot of um, fly larvae on the oak leaves that were feeding as well, that were fluorescing. And that was particularly at higher branches that I couldn't access. I was unable to confirm that. So I had to hold a torch and look through binoculars and try and pinpoint what I was looking at. So a bit awkward to do, but certainly doable. It's nice to have somebody with you to be able to do that, to hold the torch while you're looking through binoculars to get a closer view.
Yeah, the usual conundrum. You don't have enough pairs of hands when you need them.
Something that I didn't really cover in the talk that I'll cover now is about the choice of torch.
Mm.
Um, so there's two options when it comes to the wavelength of the ultraviolet torch. We've got a 395 nanometer and a 365 nanometer torch. Now, I would recommend for everybody, if you wanted to get a torch, is to invest in a 365 nanometer torch, because all of our species that we've at least tried so far, and the ones that I've spoken about today, fluoresce under 365 nanometer wavelength torches. And there are some that do under 395, but not all of them. So to guarantee to be able to find the five species that I've spoken about mostly today, I would recommend investing in a 365 nanometer torch. And there's tons of places that you can find these torches online, but also a reminder to invest in some protective eyewear as well, because there's no messing around with UV. Really, it can be very damaging for your eyes.
Yeah, that's good advice. Thank you. I mean, on that subject, is there anything to suggest that the UV light might damage the caterpillars themselves? If, I mean, you mentioned not shining it directly on them, but because you don't need to see them for the rest, but might it also harm them?
Yeah, it's a good point to make. I would avoid shining the torch on them for more than a few seconds if possible. Directly as well, I would try and avoid that completely. I don't think there's any that you need to shine it at directly. Um, even prolonged exposure to UV is damaging for most things. So I would avoid trying to do that because it can be it can be a source of disturbance for them, and it
Mm.
could be doing damage. I'm not exactly sure, but I'd rather not run the risk of doing damage,
Yeah,
especially to some of these rare species.
sure. Thank you. And do you know if, in terms of the hair streaks and that family that you were talking mostly about today, do you know if all the instars in that family will fluoresce?
Well, I think the first instar doesn't fluoresce. As far as I'm concerned, none of the first instars fluoresce. When we get into second instar, there are a few that do and a few that don't. So white letter hair streaks, in my experience at least, I've not really seen many at second instar that fluoresce. Um, to guarantee finding them, I would recommend waiting until the third and fourth, so the later instars, you'll be guaranteed to find them at that stage. So yeah, third and fourth instars are more reliable. Um, yeah, I think a brown hair streak at second instar. I did have a photo in there of a second instar that did fluoresce, so a little bit more reliable. But yeah, still, I'd probably recommend going out at the time that they're likely to be at third instar or fourth instar.
So what's the easiest way to find out roughly when that's going to be if we don't have access to, well, we will have access to your graphics that you showed earlier when the presentation is put up on our YouTube channel, so people can refer back there. But we're talking what nowish really, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So for most of these, you're probably looking at sort of late May, mid to late May
Uh,
through to June. That's probably the best time to look for them. So for the brown hair streak in particular, I would probably start looking mid May through to mid June. That'll be my critical period for looking at them. Although there will be some overlap, and it depends on the season that we get. It might be that the caterpillars are out a little bit earlier or a little bit later each year, and so you've got to try and keep track of things as they come along. There are some really useful websites that help me. The UK Butterflies website's fantastic. So they have some phenology charts that show when particular species are out or likely to be out as adults, as eggs, as caterpillars, and as pupa, and that helps guide my decision making around when I'm likely to go out looking for these different species. But yeah, for most of the hair streaks, it's likely to be between late April through to mid-June, late June.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you. Is there any suggestion yet that butterfly conservation might be sort of running any or setting up any citizen science monitoring using this technique, or we're not there yet?
It's something that's in development at the moment, really, I think, as we're exploring how this might work. And obviously there's health and safety concerns that we need to make sure we're confident with and all that sort of stuff. And we're trying to put together a more structured survey for this sort of work. It'd be useful to make sure we're standardizing this approach so that people are applying the same approach. Just like the egg search, the brown hair streak egg surveys, we want to make sure that we're applying the same sort of rigor to that survey technique as we are here. For the time being, I just recommend that if people are surveying, that they record their data and they submit it. That's the most important thing for the time being. It's likely to be more anecdotal than structured surveys. But if people would like to apply something more structured, then that's up to them. Unfortunately, we have no guidance on that at the moment, but it's something we are working on.
Yeah, it sounds like the research, as you said, is still relatively new. And great that you've been part of that as well. But yeah, looking forward to hearing more as it develops. And if we can bring it to the citizen science world, then I'm happy to see what we can do to help with that. Pete and Maria have got their hand up. Pete, do you want to? I've asked if you can unmute yourself. Maybe you'd like to ask a question.
Yes, please.
I was just wondering whether wych elm is also a source for the white letter hair streak. I mean, I know it's a different tree, but I mean, is there any kind of crossover in that direction?
Yeah, wych elm, in my experience, tends to be favoured over English elm. So I would, if you've got a wych elm, definitely.
We've got a lot around here. Yeah.
Go for it. Go nuts. Yeah, I'm sure. If you had two next to each other, one was English elm and one was wych elm, I think I'd probably put my money on the wych elm. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but and I've got one wych elm in a local park here in Exmouth. I can't find any other wych elms anywhere else, and I've looked for white letter hair streaks on plenty of other English elm and haven't found them. And it's just on this small wych elm in the middle of a park that happens to have white letter hair streaks in abundance on.
Yeah, we've got a wood up the road, so perhaps go and see if we can find something.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Okay.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Maria. And Peter, you've also got your hand up. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Max, that was very interesting, particularly as somebody who has tried to successfully found scorpions using UV, and I've tried it to sex great tits, which you can do. So there's obviously a lot to learn on this. I'm very interested to know if green hair streaks have any, if there's any information, because coming from Northern Ireland, I'm afraid I'm a bit limited on the species you've covered there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yes, so as far as I understand, they do fluoresce, green hair streak do fluoresce. The challenge is finding the caterpillars. Unfortunately, unlike most of our other hair streaks, they have a wide range of food plants. Gorse, dogwood, bird's foot trefoil. There's a long list, just like the holly blue. There is a very, very long list. Now, it's a species that I'm very curious about in terms of ultraviolet light surveys, because it uses such a wide range of food plants. I'm wondering whether there are some that feed on bird's foot trefoil that potentially don't fluoresce, and that's just a hypothesis. I don't expect that to be true necessarily, but perhaps it's the food plant that's dictating whether they do or don't fluoresce. It's just a question. I don't know whether we have an answer for that yet, but I do know that somebody has been out surveying or looking for green hair streaks and found them on gorse on Dartmoor before. So if you have some gorse and you know of some green hair streak populations nearby, then give it a shot. But yeah, please share your findings if you do find any green hair streaks, because that would be really interesting to know. Sorry, Peter, do you have a follow-up as well? Oh, you're on mute, maybe? I don't know if you're still.
I was muted there. No, I'm very fortunate. I have a site right beside my house, which is a green hair streak. Not totally reliable, but I find them there most years. So that'll be my area of choice. I've got bilberry, gorse, and bird's foot trefoil to search around me.
Brilliant. Yeah, that'd be really
I'll keep
interesting
in
to
touch.
know. Thank you. Yeah, that'd be great.
That's great. Thank you, Peter. There's one other question here in the chat about what level of darkness it needs to be for the UV technique to work. Is it from dusk onwards, or does it need to be properly dark?
It doesn't need to be properly dark, but it helps. The darker, the better. I wouldn't bother going out until 20 minutes after sunset, until it gets properly dark. Depends how excited you are to get out. You know, I'm raring to go. But yeah, I'd wait a little bit longer after sunset to make sure that it's properly dark. Also, definitely take a normal torch with you as well, because you might go out while it's light, but when you're coming back, you might have forgotten a normal torch, you know, just a white light torch. So definitely take one of those, because it's helpful just for getting around. Because yeah, when it gets dark, our nature reserves can be very dark places. So yeah.
Yeah, and who knows what else might be happening in some of those places. So I would just add, you know, obviously common sense approach and think about where you're going, and who knows where you are and what time you're going to be back, and just make those common sense precautions.
For sure, yeah. I think I would also strongly recommend never to go out alone. Always go at least with another person. Don't split up, stick together. Because, you know, if something happens, you know, it's the last thing we want is for somebody to get hurt, or yeah. So please, I would very strongly recommend to go out in a group, or at least in a pair.
Fantastic. I think we may have got to the end of the questions in the chat there, Max. I hope I haven't missed anybody's burning question. If I have, then please do raise your hand, or if anybody else has got something they would like to ask now, we have got a couple more minutes. If not, we will bring the meeting to a close. Max, on behalf of everybody that's here and listened tonight, huge thanks.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
There's got 3 hands up in the chat there that just came the last minute. I think we'll go with Peter first, then Ed, then Jill. So Peter, do you want to go first?
Thanks very much. Just very quickly, there's a lot of different choice of torch strength. What wattage do you use?
I'm not exactly sure what my wattage is, but obviously the more powerful, the better, the longer the reach will be.
Thanks.
I guess it's down to price point as well, because obviously, so have a look at what you can afford or what you're willing to spend on it as well.
Thanks.
To think that obviously the stronger, the more expensive. Ed? Ed still on mute? There we go.
Oh, sorry, I was just muted him when he just unmuted himself. Sorry, Ed.
Yeah, still on mute, Ed.
Ah, there we go. Sorry. Yeah, thanks so much for tonight. I just wanted to ask very quickly. There was you mentioned a website that was really good for looking at calendars and things. I just didn't quite catch it.
UK Butterflies.
Perfect, lovely. Thank you.
No problem. Then Jill.
Hello, yeah, I'm not Jill, I'm Heath. I just couldn't change my name. I just wanted to know what the best eyewear protections that you recommend for this, because obviously this is quite important, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just making sure that it's advertised as UV protective eyewear. Make sure if you're buying it from somewhere that there are good reviews. Just do the diligent thing of searching for UV protective eyewear and picking some that have some good reviews. The ones that I have, I think, were £2 or £3. They're not very expensive, but they do the job and they're absolutely fine. Occasionally they'll be like yellow tinted, and I think that helps. It sort of filters out some of the other, because obviously the UV torches are sort of like a violet or a blue color, and that sort of helps to neutralize the color when you're looking at the subject. So yeah, have a look around, and as long as it does advertise itself as being UV protected and the reviews are solid, then I'd give that a shot.
So where we buy the torches, are they likely to sell that product alongside, or do you have to go to a separate website normally?
Yeah, if you look on something like Amazon, there's a few packages that sell a torch and UV protective goggles, but you can find, yeah, if you have a look on Amazon, it's probably a good place to get an idea of what's available.
Okay, thanks very much.
Peter? Still on mute? No.
I'll try and unmute you, Peter, in case you're having trouble. No.
Well, if Peter's got, if you want to get in touch with Lindsay to get my email address to ask a question, I'm more than happy with that. We can't hear you yet. I don't think we've managed to get you off mute.
No,
but yeah, feel free to get in touch with Lindsay to get my email address if that would be helpful.
Okay, in that case, I will now draw this evening to a close. So thanks ever so much for all your participation. Thanks, Max, for your knowledge and sharing your expertise with us. And I will send a follow-up email round so that you've got the link to watch this talk back over if you think you might have missed anything, and that you've got contact details so you can ask any follow-up questions after today as well. So you've always got a point of contact with us now. We are very keen to hear what you find. If you do go out and have a look at this technique, how it works for you, do let us know. Max will be particularly interested in any feedback and get those records in. That's amazing. We can't know what's going on out there and do all this monitoring work without people like you helping by submitting those records. So thanks again for doing that for us all.
Is it too late to ask my question?
No, go for it. Go on, Peter.
Go for it.
Yeah, it's along the lines that you reference with eyewear. We've done surveys and I agree with you 100%. It's quite important to have eyewear. Also, perhaps wear gloves, because in the excitement of seeing caterpillars, you wave the torch around a little bit, and keeping skin away from UV is as important as eyewear.
Yeah, that's really important. Yeah, please do bear that in mind. If you've got long sleeves as well, or just a jacket to cover up the arms. But yeah, gloves is a good one. Very good recommendation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now and say good night. Enjoy the rest of your evenings, everybody. Thanks again for your participation.